"We're moving fast, Henry. You're a relic." That's what she said. No hesitation, no empathy, just a cold line delivered with a half smile and the confidence of someone who'd never spent a day on the factory floor. My name is Henry Caldwell, and for the past 20 years, I was the senior project supervisor at Atlas Forge, a heavy industrial manufacturer based in Pittsburgh. I wasn't flashy, never one for speeches or office politics, but I knew every blueprint, every machine, every weld and bolt that held this company together. I came in early, left late, and made sure our production lines ran like a symphony. But none of that mattered the day Allison Ridgway, the founder's granddaughter fresh off a business accelerator in Silicon Valley, strutted into the boardroom with a team of consultants and declared a generational reset. In a blink, I was handed a termination letter. No exit interview, no severance negotiation, just a handshake I didn't return. She thought I was expendable. She thought this was a clean break. What she didn't know, what no one in her team bothered to read, was that in 2011, her grandfather, Robert Ridgway, gifted me 8% silent equity in Atlas Forge. Back then, he'd pulled me aside and said, "If something ever happens to me, I want someone who still remembers why we built this place." He never told his daughter. Apparently, she never told her daughter either. So while Allison was drafting press releases about legacy transformation and sharing Instagram stories from the executive lounge, I was sitting in my pickup truck in the parking lot, looking at the place I helped build, now run by people who barely knew the difference between steel grade and a spreadsheet. I wasn't angry yet, but I was awake. That night, I poured myself a bourbon, opened the file cabinet Linda always said I should organize, and pulled out my shareholder certificate. The ink was still crisp. The number, HO 811, was still embossed. Allison Ridgway might have thought she fired an old man, but what she really did was wake up the one person who could shake her empire from the inside out.
I didn't retaliate that first day. Instead, I drove home in silence, letting the betrayal simmer beneath my ribs like molten steel. The next morning, I poured myself a stiff glass of 12-year-old bourbon, Linda's favorite for our anniversaries, and sat at the old kitchen table, the same one where we used to plan camping trips and kid birthday parties. This time, I spread out a folder with all my employment documents and shareholder agreements. The silence was thick, but my purpose was clear. I wasn't going to get even. I was going to get right. I called Morgan Pierce, an old friend and an even older attorney with a reputation for defending blue-collar professionals wronged by boardroom power grabs. Years ago, he'd told me, "If they ever push you out, I want first crack at it." I reminded him of that promise. By noon, we were on a Zoom call, his voice full of measured fire. "She didn't just fire you," Morgan said, flipping through the scanned documents I sent him. "She breached shareholder bylaws, terminated a minority equity holder without prior board review or cause documentation. That's a violation." But even then, it wasn't revenge I was after. It was about something bigger. Allison Ridgway didn't just fire a man. She erased a legacy. One built with scarred hands, 4 a.m. shift alarms, and a loyalty her spreadsheets would never quantify. And now, the only way to protect that legacy was to build something better. That night, I called David Lang, our former lead design engineer who was forced into early retirement 2 months after Allison stepped in. His voice cracked when he answered, not because he was sad, but because no one from Atlas had called him since. "I'm in," he said, before I even finished explaining. Next was Rita Monroe, our ex-quality control chief, a woman so precise she used to test steel batches like a sommelier swirls wine. Allison had labeled her too cautious and let her go under the guise of budget cuts. "Let's build what they think they've already perfected," I told her. Her pause was short. "What's the plan?" I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had a vision. A company built not on disruption, but on discipline. Not on eliminating experience, but amplifying it. We started meeting in secret. Quiet dinners at old diners, late-night calls from garages and home offices. David had saved CAD designs for a modular torque unit we'd never been allowed to prototype. Rita still had her quality logs showing efficiency drops since the new execs began cutting corners. And me? I had 2 decades of institutional knowledge and a name trusted across 3 counties. While Allison flaunted innovation, her first 2 production runs under the new regime had already caused issues: rejected shipments, weld failures, and missed deadlines. But she was too busy hosting influencer-style CEO talks on LinkedIn to notice. Meanwhile, I met with Frank Delgado, a longtime supplier who'd provided Atlas Forge with tempered steel for over a decade. I told him what we were planning. "If you're heading it, we'll have our best rates. Loyalty matters." Within 2 weeks, we had a small private office leased under a temporary LLC name, Iron Crest Engineering, and 3 contracts pending with mid-sized manufacturers looking for reliability over TikTok trends. But I wasn't done. I requested a full audit of my shares through Morgan. The equity, once considered symbolic, had quietly matured. Through capital growth and reinvestments, my original 8% stake was now worth close to $2.4 million, and I hadn't even touched voting power yet. And then it hit me. I didn't just have legal leverage, I had strategic capital. While Allison was trimming departments and shrinking margins, I was gathering people. The ones who actually knew how to build. The ones who weren't afraid of grease-stained jumpsuits or midnight call-ins when a machine misaligned. We didn't wear suits. We wore steel-toed boots and trust like armor. Morgan smiled on our weekly review call. "You know, Henry, they thought they replaced you with a dashboard. But dashboards don't mentor, dashboards don't improvise, and dashboards sure as hell don't make the phone calls like the one you just made." I had just finalized our first prototype contract with North Rock Assembly, a manufacturer Allison had priced out 6 months prior. They weren't just willing to work with us, they were eager. Atlas lost their touch. They forgot people make machines, not machines the other way around. And that's when I knew we were no longer playing defense. We were building something that would outlive her trends.
Just 30 days after the first secret meetings, and after we registered the shell name Iron Crest Engineering, we rebranded and launched officially as Forge North Dynamics, a name that spoke not only to strength and momentum, but to direction. We weren't just rebuilding careers, we were rebuilding trust. Our strategy was razor-focused. Instead of chasing high-volume, low-margin contracts like Allison's Atlas Forge had pivoted toward, we carved into a forgotten but lucrative niche: custom micro-precision components for aerospace applications. Components too specialized for mass production, too important to be outsourced to facilities halfway around the globe. I fronted $600,000 of my severance payout to kickstart operations, That was scary, but purposeful. And I wasn't alone. Deshaun Weir, a former Navy engineer and now a respected VC with a technical soul, took my call after just one email. "You were the one who taught the others to lead," he said. "I remember how you rebuilt that engine module under pressure at the Veteran Engineering Summit 6 years ago. If you're doing something new, I want in." Deshaun matched my investment on one condition. We didn't just hire talent, we revived it. So we went back to the source: engineers, floor leads, and QA managers who'd been swept out of Atlas without ceremony. People who knew how to build high-performance parts with tolerances tighter than a breath. People Allison deemed legacy liabilities. We brought back David, Rita, and 5 others, each with specialty skills and ideas that had been shelved under the guise of modernization. Rita took over quality assurance and had full control over our proprietary new inspection pipeline, blending machine vision AI with old-school precision testing. David redrafted his modular torque unit and turned it into our flagship product. We rented a compact facility near the old freight corridor in Dayton. It wasn't glamorous: exposed pipes, a leaky corner roof, and the scent of 30 years of steel in the walls. But it was ours. Within weeks, the machines roared again. And soon, so did the whispers. Allison had announced record innovation in her quarterly report, but within the next month, 3 former Atlas clients discreetly approached us. Their shipments were delayed, replacement parts were failing inspection, and worst of all, no one at Atlas seemed to know how to fix it. We didn't mock them. We didn't post cryptic jabs online. We just delivered. On time, on spec, without excuses. I still remember the face of the procurement officer from Leviathan Aerospace when we completed their rush order of custom titanium flange brackets in 10 days, half the time Atlas quoted, and with 99.8% precision rate. "You just saved a $3.2 million project from going off schedule," he said, eyes wide. "Atlas told us nobody else could make these." My response was simple: that's because they let go of the people who actually could. By the end of that quarter, Forge North had 6 contracts, 14 full-time employees, and a growing wait list. We reinvested everything: new machines, custom ERP systems, a wellness program, weekly roundtables where everyone spoke. People wanted to be here, not for perks, but because here they mattered. Meanwhile, whispers from Atlas turned to murmurs. 2 major clients ended contracts citing unmet standards. A leaked internal memo, quietly sent by a loyal former colleague who's still on the inside, noted a 27% drop in production efficiency. Allison, in response, doubled down. New branding, a flashy TEDx talk, and a staff reshuffle that cut even deeper. But talent doesn't forget who protected them, and neither do clients. Our office had a wall. Just drywall and corkboard, but it meant everything. We called it the foundation. Pinned on it were handwritten thank you notes from suppliers, production photos, and a faded copy of an Atlas termination letter marked "Position Redundant." One of our interns, fresh out of trade school, asked us why we kept that letter up. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Because it reminds us that being underestimated is our greatest asset." And in that moment, I didn't feel like a man fighting back anymore. I felt like a leader, reclaiming what had been stolen. Not just from me, but from every overlooked hand, every dismissed voice, every wrench-wielding genius told they were too old, too slow, too analog. Forge North wasn't a rebellion. It was a renaissance.
As Forge North gained traction, Allison panicked. It started with silence, then escalated to threats. First came a cease and desist letter accusing us of intellectual property theft. The irony, I had co-authored the designs and held co-inventor rights on 2 critical modules. One of those patents had been licensed to Atlas under a royalty agreement they'd forgotten I personally negotiated. With legal counsel already on retainer, our response was swift, surgical, and unimpressed. She backed off, briefly. Then came the olive branch. A sleek email from Allison's new executive assistant arrived late one Friday evening. It extended a consulting opportunity to help with what she called a leadership realignment initiative. Translation: her board was breathing down her neck, and she needed the person she'd just fired to put out fires she'd started. I read it twice, then archived it without replying. That Monday, she retaliated. Atlas Forge began undercutting every client they thought we'd poached, offering aggressive pricing, sometimes 30% below market. We heard from more than one procurement officer who admitted the discounts were tempting, but when they requested samples, Atlas failed to meet spec. Tolerances were off, delivery windows were missed. One batch of actuators came back with a 12% defect rate, a nightmare for any aerospace assembly line. Meanwhile, Forge North operated like clockwork. Our defect rate? 0.3%. Not because we were perfect, but because we knew how to fix things before they failed. That contrast didn't go unnoticed. 3 of our clients forwarded us a copy of Allison's follow-up emails, each increasingly desperate, offering extended warranties, no-cost replacements, and even personal guarantees. But what sealed Atlas's fate wasn't client loss, it was internal collapse. A senior engineer we once worked with leaked an email chain from Atlas's boardroom. It was brutal. Missed KPIs, ethics concerns, and one resignation after another. One board member who'd worked with her father even wrote, "We didn't build Atlas to become a startup with no soul." That same week, Atlas's chairman called me. "David," his voice thin and barded, "we want you back, not under her, but over her, as interim CEO, to stabilize things while we restructure." It felt surreal. 6 months earlier, I was carting my life out in a cardboard box. Now I was being offered the throne of the empire that discarded me. I didn't answer immediately. I asked for a meeting, but I didn't go alone. Rita came. So did Thomas. And Deshaun, who'd believed in Forge North before we had a sign on the door. In that boardroom, we laid it out plainly. We'd only consider involvement if Atlas was merged under Forge North, not the other way around. We'd keep our culture, our leadership, our talent, and our values. The board looked stunned, some resisted, until we showed them the numbers. Since Forge North launched, we had secured 8 contracts in sectors Atlas had ignored, grown our team from 5 to 22 employees with 0 turnover, delivered over 14,000 parts with a customer satisfaction score of 98%, filed 2 new patents with technologies that would redefine modular hydraulics. Atlas had burned bridges. We were building highways. The chairman leaned back and said, "We are prepared to dissolve the existing executive structure, including Ms. Kessler, and begin negotiations for integration under your leadership." I nodded. Then we have a deal. The merger happened quietly, but the industry noticed. Within weeks, Allison was out. She issued a statement about pursuing new opportunities. We didn't gloat, we didn't smear, we just got back to work. And Forge North became Forge North Atlas, a hybrid company with old grit and new vision. We invited back many former Atlas employees who'd left under her regime. Not all accepted, but many did. Those who returned were surprised to find no bitterness, only structure, vision, and opportunity. We restructured teams, rebuilt morale, and introduced quality protocols that once made Atlas the gold standard. Procurement teams returned. So did dignity. And in the corner of our newly expanded headquarters, I mounted the last letter Allison sent me, the consulting offer. right next to our first Forge North purchase order. Above it hung a small plaque that simply read, "Don't burn bridges. Rebuild them stronger." When I stepped into the Atlas conference room one final time, it wasn't with a chip on my shoulder. It was with a plan in hand and a team behind me. David and Rita flanked me as we entered the room filled with executives who had once treated me like a relic. This time they looked at us differently, not as former employees, but as the builders of something better. Forge North had proven its mettle, and the numbers spoke louder than any apology could. We didn't bring anger. We brought proof. David began with our performance dashboard, showing a 97% on-time delivery rate, 0 safety incidents, and client churn at an industry-low 1.4%. Rita followed with case studies of 3 legacy Atlas clients who had moved to Forge North and seen measurable improvements in both quality and support. Then I stood, took a breath, and looked around the room. Forge North was never meant to replace Atlas. It was built to preserve the values Atlas once stood for: excellence, respect, and people over spreadsheets. Then I turned to Allison. She was seated at the far end of the table, arms crossed, lips tight. But I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Not defeat, but awareness. She knew she'd lost the room. I held her gaze. It's not age that slows people down. It's arrogance that makes them trip. The room went still. The board moved swiftly after that. A 7-2 vote ratified the merger agreement. Forge North would acquire Atlas's aerospace division in full. The rest of Atlas would be absorbed into our structure gradually. I was appointed chief executive of the newly unified Forge North Atlas, with veto power over all executive decisions for the next 2 years. Allison stood, lips parted like she had a rebuttal ready, but no words came. She collected her folder and left the room without another glance. Nobody followed her. In the weeks that followed, transition teams were deployed. Rita led HR restructuring, focusing on talent retention and career development. David took on systems integration, merging our lean digital architecture with Atlas's outdated infrastructure. We also reactivated Atlas's apprentice program, which Allison had cut during her tenure. For me, it wasn't just a strategic move. It was symbolic. We weren't just taking back a company. We were reviving a legacy. I made it a point to visit every single production line in our first month post-merger. I shook hands, listened to frustrations, and reminded the staff this isn't a takeover. This is a rebuild. People noticed. Emails poured in from employees expressing gratitude for the return of stability. One machinist, a 34-year Atlas veteran, pulled me aside during a walkthrough and said, "You gave this place its soul back." 3 months in, we landed our first major joint contract, a $42 million deal with an aerospace defense contractor previously lost under Allison's leadership. Their procurement head said plainly, "We trust your team again." We reinvested that windfall into a new R&D wing, focusing on next-gen modular hydraulic systems, and reinstated quarterly bonuses based on team performance, something that hadn't been seen at Atlas in over 5 years. More than anything, the shift in culture was palpable. Teams once afraid to speak up were now contributing actively in strategy sessions. Engineers who had left under Allison began sending in applications to return, not because of the money, but because they wanted to be part of something that mattered again. One afternoon, I received a package at my office. No note, no sender listed. Inside was a small navy blue notebook, weathered and stained. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Allison's father, Thomas Kessler.
his old operations logbook from the first Atlas Forge facility. Taped to the inside cover was a yellow post-it with 2 words, scrawled in elegant cursive. Thank you. No signature, but I knew who it was. A year after the merger, we hosted our first company-wide summit under the Forge North Atlas banner. It was held at the newly renovated headquarters, now bustling with talent, new machines, and, most importantly, hope. I stood on stage with David and Rita beside me, addressing an audience of 700 employees. I didn't talk about profits or projections. I talked about resilience. About remembering the people who built the foundation. About moving forward without forgetting where we came from. When I finished, the room gave a standing ovation. Not just for me, but for us. For the journey. For the values that survived the fire. And somewhere in the back row, I thought I saw Allison. Maybe it was just someone who looked like her. Maybe not. Either way, I hoped she saw what real leadership looked like. Not domination, but restoration, freeing potential.
1 year after everything changed, I stood once more at the heart of something new. Only this time, it truly belonged to all of us. Our Forge North Atlas facility hummed with a rhythm that was no longer forced or strained. It was alive. David had just wrapped up a successful product demo with a visiting aerospace firm. Rita was guiding a team of interns, some of whom had never imagined themselves working in engineering before this place gave them a chance. The halls were no longer filled with silence and suspicion, but with laughter, debate, and shared purpose. We hadn't just rebuilt a company, we'd reclaimed a culture. And in doing so, I'd found something I hadn't expected: peace. When I looked back on everything, being dismissed without dignity, watching good people pushed aside, starting from scratch with nothing but an idea and a backbone, I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I felt gratitude. Because that injustice, it sparked a fire I didn't know I still had. That rage, it taught me to rise with purpose. That journey, it brought people back together, not just to fight back, but to build forward. I received a letter a few weeks ago. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a note, written in the crisp penmanship of an old-school hand. You honored what I built by refusing to let it rot. Thank you. Signed, Charles Ridgway. I closed my eyes and held that letter for a long moment. That wasn't validation. That was recognition. Not for revenge, not for profit, but for doing what's right, even when no one's watching. In the end, the lesson was simple but powerful. You don't have to burn the past to rise from it. Sometimes you just have to protect the parts worth keeping and have the courage to carry them forward. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or quietly replaced, then know this: your value isn't determined by titles or trends. It's measured by how you rise when others expect you to fall. Drop a comment below if you've ever fought to be seen. Hit that subscribe button for more stories of quiet strength, earned respect, and real redemption. Your story isn't over. Maybe it's just beginning.